I met Vincent long before I understood what his presence would mean for my life. We were both cast in the apartment, a project that felt modest at first glance but turned into one of the most defining crossroads of my existence. The set was crowded, noisy, filled with people rushing under bright lights, but the very first moment he looked at me, everything else dimmed as if someone had lowered the volume of the world. He wasn't conventionally handsome in a quiet way. He had a dangerous charm, the kind that announces itself without asking permission. His energy arrived before he did, restless, intense, unpredictable. And I, who was used to being observed rather than approached, felt something shift inside me when our eyes met. His confidence wasn't arrogant. It was instinctive, animal, almost magnetic. We weren't supposed to fall for each other. We were professionals, both dedicated to the work, both careful about mixing personal and public lives. But the chemistry between us was impossible to ignore. It leaked into every scene, every rehearsal, every accidental touch. The director noticed it before we did. The crew whispered about it. And eventually, we surrendered to what had been burning dangerously close to the surface. From the very beginning, our relationship didn't follow a gentle pace. It moved fast with the intensity of two people who rarely lived halfway. We didn't transition into love, we collided with it. One moment we were colleagues sharing cigarettes in the chilly Paris mornings. The next, he was part of my world in a way that felt immediate and strangely natural. Paris became our playground. We walked through streets like teenagers, hiding from the press, laughing in cheap cafes, escaping to the countryside whenever filming ended. There was a sense of adventure in everything we did, the kind of passion that feeds on spontaneity. Vincent loved chaos. I loved beauty. Together, we balanced each other in ways I didn't anticipate. Not long after, the world around us expanded. My career accelerated, his rose quickly alongside mine, and suddenly we were the couple everyone talked about, the Italian goddess and the French rebel. We traveled constantly. Rome, Marrakesh, New York, Sydney. Hotel rooms became temporary homes. Airport gates replaced living rooms. But somehow, between flights and film sets, we carved out a life that felt ours. When we married, it wasn't an extravagant ceremony. It was simple, intimate, almost quiet, a choice we made deliberately. The world already had opinions about us. We wanted one thing that belonged only to us. For a while, it felt like we had found something rare. Love that didn't try to tame us. Passion that grew instead of shrinking under pressure. And then came the moment that shifted everything, motherhood. When our first daughter, Deva, was born, I remember looking at her and feeling a tenderness that rivaled anything I had ever felt for Vincent. She was delicate, perfect, with his intensity and my calmness woven together in the tiny miracle sleeping on my chest. He cried when he held her for the first time, a moment of vulnerability that surprised even him. Those early years as parents were some of the happiest in my life. We moved between Paris and Rome, sometimes escaping to the Basque Coast where the days felt longer, quieter. Our home was filled with baby clothes, scripts scattered on tables, the smell of espresso, the chaos of two artistic lives trying to function under one roof. And despite all the noise, there was love, warm, messy, overwhelming. 2 years later, we welcomed our second daughter, Leonie. With her arrival, the balance in our family shifted again. I slowed my career to be present for them. Vincent didn't slow his. He wasn't made for stillness, and I didn't ask him to be someone he wasn't. I believed love meant accepting a man fully, even the parts that frightened you a little. But passion is a demanding companion. What once felt electrifying eventually turned uneven. The more grounded I became as a mother, the more restless he grew as an artist. And in that restlessness, new shadows appeared, whispers from sets, unfamiliar names mentioned too casually, phone calls taken in another room. I tried to explain the distance as exhaustion, as work pressure, as the natural ebb and flow of long relationships. But deep down, I recognized the shift. The man who once couldn't take his eyes off me now seemed distracted, absent. sometimes entirely elsewhere even while sitting beside me. We still traveled, but the air between us changed. In Marrakesh, he wandered alone at night. In Rome, he came home later than he used to. In Paris, he became strangely protective of his phone, a small detail, but nothing meaningful in a marriage begins loudly. It always starts with something subtle. I wasn't ready to confront what those small changes meant. Love like ours teaches you to endure the burn long before you see the flames clearly. I reminded myself of our passion, our history, our family. I convinced myself he was simply overwhelmed by work. But fire reveals itself when it wants to. And though I didn't yet know the full truth, I already sensed that something was unraveling, not abruptly, but with a slow, deliberate pull of a thread holding a tapestry together. Our life, once alive with passion, had begun to crack in places I had never expected. And the man who had once set my world alight was starting to ignite things far beyond the reach of our home. For a long time, I tried to pretend nothing had changed. When you have children, a home, a history that stretches across continents and film sets and years of shared dreams, you learn to protect the world you built, sometimes even from the truth. I told myself that love evolves, that passion settles, that marriage is not supposed to feel like a constant blaze. But what I felt wasn't calm. It was absence, the kind that grows silently, the kind you can't touch but you feel everywhere. The first real crack showed during a summer in Italy. We brought the girls to Umbria, a place I loved for its stillness, its olive groves, the warmth that held you even at night. It should have been peaceful, a break from the noise of our careers. Instead, I found myself watching Vincent drift through the house like a visitor, affectionate with the children, distracted with me. He took calls on the terrace, speaking quietly, turning his back toward the room where I sat reading. When I approached, he would lower his voice, and the call, smile at me as if nothing was unusual. It was a small thing, innocent on the surface. But after more than a decade together, I knew the difference between privacy and secrecy. Still, I didn't ask. Part of me feared the answer. When we returned to Paris, the distance between us became harder to ignore. Vincent threw himself into work with a hunger that felt less like ambition and more like escape. He spent weeks away filming, returning home with a kind of intensity that didn't feel like longing. It felt like guilt wrapped in tenderness. He held me too close, then pulled away too fast. He kissed me with urgency, and then went silent for hours. At night, he sometimes stayed awake long after I fell asleep, staring at the ceiling as though searching for something he couldn't name. I wanted to reach for him, but every time I tried, something inside him retreated. The whispers grew louder too. Not from tabloids, I never cared about those, but from people who worked near him. A makeup artist who hesitated before greeting me. A costume assistant who looked nervous when I asked how the shoot was going. A friend of mine who warned, very gently, that artists have their moments of weakness. Weakness. That word stayed with me for months. I didn't need anyone to confirm anything. My intuition had turned into an ache I carried everywhere. But I wasn't ready to destroy the life we had built. Not yet. I told myself we were simply weathering a storm, that passion like ours was bound to leave scars, that we could still find our way back. And for a while we did. There were moments, rare but real, when it felt like the old fire flickered back to life. We took the girls to the coast. He made them laugh the way only he could. We spent evenings cooking together, dancing barefoot on cold kitchen tiles, collapsing into bed with the kind of intimacy that made me believe we still belonged to each other. But the calm never lasted. He grew restless again. The late nights returned. The calls behind closed doors. The strange mix of guilt and desire in his eyes. Eventually, the truth no longer hid in shadows. It took shape in moments so small they were impossible to ignore. A message on his phone that he closed too fast. A perfume I didn't wear. A charged silence when I walked into a room. I never asked, "Is there someone else?" I didn't need to. The answer had been living with us for months. What people rarely understand is that a woman doesn't break the moment she learns of a betrayal. She breaks during the long, painful period when she has already known the truth, but is still pretending not to. That was the period that hollowed me out in ways I didn't expect. And yet, I stayed. For the girls.
For the years invested.
For the hope that perhaps this fire, once wild and beautiful, could still be tamed into something warm and steady. But the flame was no longer mine to hold. The night everything shifted was unremarkable on the surface. We were in Paris. The girls were asleep. The house was quiet. Vincent returned home late, smelling of cold air and something that wasn't tobacco. When he walked past me, his eyes didn't meet mine, and in that single gesture, I felt our marriage ending more clearly than if he had spoken the words. The next morning, I looked at him across the breakfast table and understood that love, real love, sometimes dies without cruelty, without fights, without dramatic confessions. It dies when two people grow in different directions, when one seeks freedom and the other seeks stability, when the fire that once united them begins burning separate paths. We separated quietly, almost gently, the way people do when their hearts are bruised but their respect remains intact. There were no slammed doors, no accusations, no public scenes. Only a long, heavy silence filled with everything we didn't say. Our daughters were the one thing we stayed united in. Being their parents kept us connected in a way that felt grounding, even when everything else had unraveled. We still traveled together sometimes, still appeared side by side, still shared a life, just not a marriage. People speculated endlessly. But no one knew the truth, that our love story didn't end because passion faded, but because passion alone wasn't enough to carry us through the weight of who we became. Vincent and I remained intertwined long after the papers were signed, the way two people who have burned together often do. There was affection, even tenderness, beneath the ashes. But the part of him that once belonged to me was gone, claimed by choices he never fully admitted, and by a restlessness I could never compete with.
And
I rebuilt my life slowly, lovingly, with a strength I didn't know I possessed. I learned that beauty doesn't protect you from heartbreak, fame doesn't shield you from betrayal, and passion doesn't guarantee loyalty. But I also learned something quieter, something more important. Some fires burn you, others forge you, and the flame I once loved did both.